Hey, so I have written a book, and with all the eclipse business, I decided I would finish a book that I started, about 15 years ago. I grew up with a very dispensationalist, kind of family and view of the world, and so I'm fairly well acquainted with the typical talking points. And so I thought I would just go ahead and say, are these interpretations actually biblical? What are the actual key passages in the Bible mean? Now, I'm a firm believer that God can do whatever he wants. So maybe Darby, John Nelson Darby, who came up with a lot of these interpretations in the early 1800s, maybe he was inspired. Maybe he knew exactly by God's revelation how the world was going to end. However, I don't think that his interpretations are necessarily biblical. And so I thought I would go through and kind of, well, here's the text, and here's what they probably meant. Now, Darby was ingenious. I mean, I marvel at the beauty of the system that he set up. But anyway, I'm about to start a series. It won't interrupt my other series on YouTube, but I'm going to start a series in which I talk a little bit about each chapter. And then, of course, if you want the full chapter, you'll have to buy the book. But the title of the book is The Sun Will Grow Dark, the Moon Turn to Blood. It's available on both Amazon, and I've started a Shopify channel. The Shopify channel is kenshankbooks.com. Ken Shank Books is all one word. You'll notice that on Amazon it's $12.99, but if you go to Shopify, you get it for $10.99. This is the ebook. You can also get the paperback on both Amazon and on Shopify. But anyway, I'll put the link to this particular book somewhere, maybe down here. Maybe it'll magically appear, the link to get this particular book. Well, let's look at the table of contents, shall we? So here's the table of contents. I start, and this is what I'm going to do in this particular video, kind of give the end times plot line that you see in most dispensationalist circles. It's the one I grew up with. In the Left Behind novels, it's the plot line back in the day with Hal Lindsey, late great Planet Earth, and well before that. Kind of the overall dispensational storyline. I'm going to share that in this video if you hold on. But you can see that I cover the topics that are generally part of a dispensationalist, and I'll explain what a dispensationalist is in soon enough. But anyway, first of all, there's a pessimistic view of the world. Things are going to get worse and worse. And then, of course, right before it looks like everything's lost, then Jesus will return. But also there's the idea that in modern dispensationalism, that Israel will become a nation. Now, Darby, the guy that came up with this, he didn't necessarily think that would happen until after the tribulation began, but lo and behold, in 1948, Israel became a nation. My grandfather thought that was a major fulfillment of prophecy, so we'll talk about that in the third video. Then there's the rapture, a lot of disputing of the rapture. We'll talk a little bit about what seems to be biblical and what maybe isn't biblical in rapture thinking. Magog will attack Israel. That's very popular right now because Iran has launched drones on Israel. So they used to think, and when I was a boy, they thought the Soviet Union would be Magog. And you still occasionally will hear the idea that Russia somehow will be Magog. Right now, I bet that there's some prophecy channels who are suggesting that maybe Iran is Magog. Well, we'll talk about Ezekiel 38 and 39 soon enough. Then in Revelation 7, it talks about those who've come out of the Great Tribulation, the idea of a 7-year tribulation. I'm going to argue that, well, first of all, God can do whatever he wants, but there is no place for a 7-year tribulation that hasn't happened yet when we read both Revelation and Daniel in context. Again, God can do whatever he wants. The Antichrist is coming, chapter 6. He sets himself up in the temple as God, 2 Thessalonians 2. Then they gathered at a place called Armageddon, Revelation 16, I believe. They bound Satan for 1,000 years. I think that's Revelation 19, is it? Or 20? Maybe 20. And then I saw a great white throne. And then I end with what actually is the biblical New Testament plot line for the end times. And that's basically what this book is about. Now, let me go ahead and talk a little bit about the end times plot line of dispensationalism. By going through the table of contents, I've kind of told you what the plot line is. Let me tell you who John Nelson Darby was. He was an Irish minister. They talk about him hearing a vision from a woman named MacDonald, but I'm not going to, again, that's called the ad hominem fallacy when you attack the person rather than the ideas. We're not here to attack John Nelson Darby. I'm sure he's a very godly man. But I do want to evaluate whether or not the system that he came up with is actually accurate to the Bible. So there are kind of two plot lines in Darby. Darby, he said that there are different dispensations, that God deals with this group this way, and then he decides he wants to work with this group this way, and then he decides he wants to work with this group this way. My impression is that in Darby's view, and this had a big impact on the United States in the late 1800s, early 1900s, that it's almost like God gets bored with one way of dealing with it. It's all part of the plan, of course, but Darby thought that there was a missing week in the book of Daniel. So you have these 70 weeks, 69 of them lead up to Jesus, and then he thought there was a leftover week for the end times, and that God kind of switched gears so he was working with Israel in that particular dispensation, but now he's working with Gentiles. But when he's done working with Gentiles, there'll be a rapture, and then he'll work with the Jews for one more week, and a week means 7 years, and that's the Great Tribulation. And so 1948 kind of changed dispensational thinking because Israel's ahead of schedule. They become a nation. But we're going to talk a little bit about the role of Israel, which is a very hot topic right now, the role of Israel biblically. How does that map out? And I don't tell you what political views to have today, but I do lay some ground rules that I think will be helpful and that kind of thing. There's this idea of a rapture in which all the believers go off to be with Jesus in heaven forever. So they don't come back to a new earth in rapture thinking. They go off and they stay off. That's interesting. I grew up with that, and it wasn't even until I was teaching that I realized that the idea of spending eternity in heaven is probably not the historical position of the church. But tribulation, a 7-year tribulation, I've already mentioned it. This Antichrist rises. We'll talk about the Antichrist in this book. Gog and Magog. Who is Gog and Magog? Are they going to attack Israel? Or is this the Arab League attacking Israel? I guarantee you that in 1948, in the first war, that everybody was saying it's the end times. It's the end times. It's Ezekiel 30, 38, 39. But of course, every prediction like that's been wrong. I mean, that's very sobering, right? There's a 100% failure rate on these predictions. So that's very sobering. But there's Armageddon, the final battle. There's a millennium of 1,000 years, or is there? That's how literally do we take that? I got a little ahead of myself. There's the rebuilding and destruction of the temple. There are prophecies about the rebuilding of the temple. What are they about? And there's prophecies about the destruction of the temple. What are they about? We're going to find that a lot of that actually took place in the first century and before. Well, feel free to go ahead and buy the book ahead of schedule. You can get the online version, the ebook immediately, and you can get the paperback in a few days if you want to order that way. You can also order through Amazon. But I'm going to take, I think, 12 of these posts. I'll do a couple a week maybe for the next few weeks, and talking about my new book, which is The Sun Will Grow Dark, the Moon Turn to Blood.